The Mafia boss who controlled everything was about to lose control of the one thing that mattered. Damian Moretti had buried men for less than a glance. He'd built an empire on fear, precision, and absolute dominance. But when the wedding veil lifted and he saw her face, not the plain Jane he'd been promised, but a woman who looked like she could ruin him without lifting a finger, something inside him cracked. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was a contract, a signature, a means to an end. But Lena Ashford didn't play by anyone's rules, not even his. Stay with me until the end. Like this video and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Buds. The chapel smelled like old wood and expensive lilies, a combination that made Damian's jaw tighten. He didn't do churches, didn't do sentimentality, and he sure as hell didn't do weddings, especially his own. But here he was. The organ music started, some classical piece he didn't recognize and didn't care to. His fingers drummed once against his thigh before he forced them still. Control. Always control. That's what kept him alive in a world where weakness got you killed before breakfast. Marco stood beside him, playing the part of best man like he wasn't also Damian's head of security and the man who'd killed 3 people just last week. Marco's face was a mask of polite interest, the kind you wore when you were attending a wedding and not a business transaction dressed up in white silk. "You good?" Marco muttered, barely moving his lips. "Fine. You look like you're about to execute someone." "Maybe I am." Damian's voice was flat. "This whole thing is a circus. It's politics, same thing." The doors at the back of the chapel opened. Damian didn't turn, didn't need to. He knew what was coming down that aisle, some timid little thing the Ashford family had kept locked away for years. All glasses and baggy clothes and nervous energy. He'd seen exactly one photo, grainy and clearly outdated, showing a girl who looked like she'd rather be invisible. Perfect. He didn't want a wife who'd demand attention or emotion or any of the other exhausting things women seem to require. He wanted someone who'd sign the papers, live in the guest wing, and let him run his empire without interference. The footsteps were soft against the stone floor. Measured, not rushing, not hesitating. Interesting. Damian kept his eyes forward, focused on the priest who looked about as comfortable as a man in a confessional with a serial killer. The old man's hand shook slightly as he held the book of vows. Smart. Fear kept people honest. The footsteps stopped beside him. Damian caught a whiff of something, jasmine maybe, with something darker underneath. Not the floral explosion he'd expected, something more deliberate. The priest cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved," "Skip it," Damian said. "Get to the binding part." A ripple of discomfort went through the small crowd. There weren't many guests. His side was mostly soldiers trying to look like civilians. Her side was a handful of Ashfords who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. This wasn't a celebration. It was a merger. The priest stammered through an abbreviated version of the ceremony. Damian answered when required, his voice carrying the same tone he used when ordering executions. Efficient, final, emotionless. Then it was her turn. "I do." The voice wasn't what he expected. Not meek, not trembling. Clear and steady, with something underneath that sounded almost like defiance. Damian's attention sharpened. He still hadn't looked at her. Some part of him wanted to maintain the distance, keep this thing abstract. Once he looked, she'd become real, and real meant complicated. "You may now kiss the bride." Here it was, the moment he'd been dreading, some awkward, obligatory press of lips that would satisfy tradition and seal the contract. He turned, already planning the most clinical kiss possible, and stopped. The woman standing beside him wasn't the one from the photo. She couldn't be. The veil had been lifted back, and Damian found himself looking at a face that made his brain stumble over itself trying to process. Sharp cheekbones, full lips painted a dark red that looked like a warning, eyes that weren't just brown but the color of expensive whiskey, and just as intoxicating. Her hair was dark, pulled back in an elegant twist that exposed a neck he suddenly wanted to. He shut that thought down hard. But the damage was done. His composure, the thing he prided himself on more than anything, had cracked. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to notice. One corner of her mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. More like she'd just won a hand of poker he hadn't realized they were playing. "Problem?" she asked quietly, so only he could hear. Damian's eyes narrowed. "No?" Then you should probably kiss me before people start asking questions. He didn't like being told what to do, hadn't tolerated it since he was 16 and put a bullet in the man who thought he could give Damien Moretti orders. But she was right. The natives were getting restless. He leaned in, intending something brief and forgettable. Her hand came up to rest against his chest. Light, barely there, but he felt it like a brand through the expensive fabric of his suit. The kiss was supposed to be nothing, a formality, a checkbox on a contract. It wasn't. Her lips were soft but not yielding. She didn't melt into him like women usually didn't sigh or grab at his jacket or any of the other predictable responses he'd learned to expect and ignore. She just met him, matched him, gave exactly as much as she took and not a fraction more. When they pulled apart, Damien's heart was doing something it hadn't done in years, racing. He hated it. The crowd applauded politely. Damien took Lena's arm, felt the lean muscle under the silk of her dress, and walked her down the aisle like he was escorting a prisoner. Maybe he was. Maybe they both were. The reception was at his penthouse. He'd insisted on it, wanting home field advantage. The great room had been transformed into something elegant and slightly obscene, the kind of display that reminded people exactly who they were dealing with. Money, power, the kind you didn't question. Lena moved through it like she'd been born to it. That was the second thing that bothered him. She didn't gawk, didn't touch things with wonder or comment on the view of Central Park stretched out below them. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, took a small sip, and surveyed the room with the kind of calm assessment that made Damien think of a general studying a battlefield. Impressive, she said, turning to him. Compensating for something? Marco, who'd been approaching with 2 more drinks, actually choked. Damien's expression didn't change. Excuse me? The apartment. It's very... She waved her free hand vaguely. Aggressive, all this glass and steel and height, makes a statement. And what statement is that? That you want people to know you've won. She took another sip of champagne. The question is what exactly you think you've won. Before Damien could respond, before he could figure out if he wanted to respond with words or violence, Anthony Rinaldi appeared at his elbow. Anthony was old money, old family, and old enough to remember when Damien was still getting his hands dirty personally instead of delegating. Damien, congratulations, my boy! Anthony's smile was all teeth, no warmth. What a lovely bride. I had no idea the Ashford girl had grown up so beautifully. Neither did I, Damien said, his voice carefully neutral. Well, you're a lucky man. Beauty and brains, from what I hear. She went to Stanford, didn't she? Economics? Lena turned that whiskey-colored gaze on Anthony. Behavioral economics, actually. The study of why people make irrational decisions even when they know better. Fascinating, Anthony said, though his eyes had already glazed over. Well, I'll let you two enjoy your evening. As he walked away, Damien leaned closer to Lena. Stanford? You didn't read the file? I read enough. Clearly not. She set down her champagne glass. If you'll excuse me, I should probably make the rounds. Isn't that what brides do at receptions? Smile and pretend they're happy to be here? She walked away before he could stop her. Not that he would have. Damien didn't chase, didn't pursue. Things came to him, or they didn't matter. He watched her work the room, and it was work. He recognized the mechanics of it. The slight tilt of the head that made people feel heard. The strategic touches on arms and shoulders that built false intimacy. The laugh that came at exactly the right moments, never too loud, never too soft. She was good. Too good. Boss, Marco materialized beside him again. We need to talk about the thing. The thing, right. Because even on his wedding day, the world didn't stop turning. Some supplier in Queens was getting ambitious, forgetting the rules about territory and respect. It would need to be handled. Later, Damien said. It's kind of urgent. I said later. His tone left no room for argument. Marco nodded and disappeared back into the crowd. Damien's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the message, and felt his jaw tighten. The supplier wasn't just getting ambitious, he was getting stupid, making threats, spreading rumors that Damien was getting soft, distracted. He looked up, found Lena across the room. She was talking to someone's wife, looking genuinely interested in whatever boring story the woman was telling. As if she felt his gaze, Lena's eyes flicked to him. held for just a second, then back to the woman, seamless, soft, distracted. Maybe they were right. The reception dragged on for another 2 hours. Damien made the required appearances, gave the expected speech, cut the cake that neither of them would eat. Through it all, he was aware of Lena, where she was, who she was talking to, how she moved through his space like she belonged there. It irritated him more than it should have. Finally, blessedly, people started to leave. The Ashfords were among the first, her father giving Damien a look that was part warning, part resignation, as if he knew exactly what kind of man he'd just sold his daughter to and was trying to make peace with it. When the last guest left, silence filled the penthouse like water rushing into a sinking ship. Damien loosened his tie. "Maria will show you to your room." Lena, who'd been staring out at the city lights, turned. "My room?" "The guest suite. East wing. It has its own bathroom, sitting area. Everything you'll need." "I see." Her expression didn't change. "And where will you be?" "My room. West wing." "How convenient. We can have an entire marriage without ever seeing each other." "That's the idea." She studied him for a moment, and Damien had the uncomfortable feeling of being dissected. Not examined, dissected, like she could see past the armor he'd spent years building and was cataloging every weakness underneath. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I don't particularly care. I think you're scared." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Damien didn't move, but something in his stillness made most people take a step back. Lena didn't. "Careful," he said softly. "Of what? You? We're married now, Damien. What are you going to do, divorce me? That would defeat the entire purpose of this arrangement." She moved closer, and he caught that scent again. Jasmine and something dangerous. "Or maybe you're planning something more permanent, though I imagine that would complicate your alliance with my family." "What's your point?" "My point is that you didn't know what you were getting today. You thought you were getting someone quiet and forgettable, someone who'd stay in her corner and let you pretend this marriage doesn't exist." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. "But that's not who I am. So you have a choice. You can spend the next however many years avoiding me and making us both miserable, or you can accept that this is real now, whether you like it or not." Damien looked down at her. She was tall, but he still had several inches on her. Should have been intimidating. Should have made her back down. Didn't. "You think you know me," he said. "I know your type. Men who mistake control for strength, who think fear equals respect." She tilted her head slightly. "But you want to know the truth? People don't fear you because you're strong. They fear you because you're unpredictable. And that's just another word for out of control." His hand moved before he thought about it, catching her chin. "Not hard, just enough to make a point. You should be more careful about psychoanalyzing someone who kills people for a living." "Probably." Her voice was steady. "But you won't kill me. I'm too valuable. There are worse things than death." "I'm aware." She pulled back, breaking the contact. "Maria's waiting to show me to my cage. I should probably go settle in." She walked toward the hallway, her heels clicking against the marble floor. At the doorway, she paused. "Damien?" He didn't answer. "This marriage might have started as a contract, but I don't do anything halfway, so get used to the idea that I'm not going anywhere." She glanced back over her shoulder. "And neither is whatever this is between us, whether you acknowledge it or not." Then she was gone, leaving him alone in a room full of wilting flowers and half-empty champagne glasses. Damien stood there for a long moment, trying to identify the feeling spreading through his chest. It wasn't anger, wasn't fear. It was something more unsettling, interest. He'd spent years eliminating anything in his life that didn't serve a purpose. People were assets or obstacles. Emotions were liabilities. The world was a machine, and he'd learned to operate it with cold precision. Then Lena Ashford walked into his perfectly controlled existence and looked at him like she could see every gear turning, every calculation running, every wall he'd built. And worse, she didn't seem impressed. His phone buzzed again. The supplier situation. Right. This was what mattered. Business. Empire. Power. Not some woman with whiskey eyes and too much nerve. He pulled up Marco's number, sent a quick text with instructions. Clean. Quiet. A message, not a massacre. But as he headed to his own room, he couldn't stop thinking about the way Lena had stood her ground, the way she'd touched his chest during the kiss, so light but so deliberate, like she was testing something, or claiming it. Damien Moretti didn't get claimed. He was the one who owned things, who controlled them, who decided their value and discarded them when they stopped being useful. The problem was, he couldn't figure out how to discard someone who seemed determined not to be dismissed. His room was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Impersonal, functional, more like a hotel suite than somewhere someone actually lived. He preferred it that way. No photos, no mementos, nothing that could be used against him. Nothing that suggested a life beyond the empire. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, stood at the window looking out at the city that bent to his will in 1,000 different ways. Somewhere in this same building, in the guest suite he'd had prepared months ago when this arrangement was first proposed, Lena was probably doing the same thing, looking out at the same city. Thinking, what? Did she regret this? Fear it? Or was she even now planning her next move? Damien drained the scotch in one swallow, felt the burn, welcomed it. Tomorrow he'd reassert control. Make it clear that marriage certificate or not, this was still his domain, his rules, his life. Tonight, though, in the quiet dark with the city spread out below him like a kingdom, he let himself acknowledge one uncomfortable truth. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Damien Moretti had no idea what was going to happen next. And the woman responsible was sleeping 50 feet away. Checked. Morning came too early and too bright. Damien was awake before dawn, the way he always was. Years of conditioning. You didn't survive in his world by sleeping in, getting comfortable, letting your guard down. He went through his routine with mechanical precision. Workout, shower, suit, coffee. Checked the overnight reports from his various operations. The supplier situation had been handled. Marco was efficient, if nothing else. 3 broken fingers and a very clear explanation of how things worked in this city. The man would heal, the lesson would stick. By 7, Damien was in his office, a room off the main living area that had been designed to intimidate. Dark wood, leather, floor-to-ceiling windows that made visitors feel exposed while he remained in shadow. Every detail calculated. He didn't expect to hear movement in the penthouse this early. His staff didn't arrive until 8, and he'd assumed Lena would sleep late, adjust slowly to her new life. Wrong again. The sound of heels on marble reached him through the open door. He looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing, and there she was. Lena stood in the doorway of his office wearing a black dress that was professional enough for a board meeting, but cut in a way that suggested other kinds of negotiation. Her hair was down today, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. The glasses from the photo were nowhere in sight. "You're up early," she said. I'm always up early." "Me too." She glanced around the office, taking in the power plays and dominant signals he'd built into every corner. "Nice room. Very you. Is there something you need?" "Coffee. I was going to make some, but your kitchen is bigger than my childhood home and approximately 3 times as intimidating." She leaned against the doorframe. "I don't suppose you'd show me where things are." It was a trap. Had to be. Some play to get him engaged, draw him into domestic territory where the rules were different. But he stood anyway. Fine. The kitchen was a masterpiece of modern design and completely wasted on him. Damien didn't cook, barely ate at home. His staff prepared meals when necessary, otherwise he grabbed whatever was convenient and moved on. Lena looked around with something approaching awe. "This is obscene. Do you even use half of this?" "No." "Figures." She moved to the espresso machine, running her fingers over it like a musician greeting an instrument. "At least you have good taste in equipment." Within minutes she had coffee brewing, and the smell filled the kitchen. Damien watched her move through the space, learning it, claiming it, making it hers in small, subtle ways. "You want one?" she asked. He should say no, should retreat to his office and the work that actually mattered. Instead he said, "Black." She made 2 cups, handed him one. Their fingers brushed in the exchange. Brief. Accidental. He felt it anyway. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, drinking coffee in silence. It should have been awkward. It was awkward, actually, but Lena didn't seem to care. She just sipped her coffee and looked out at the morning light hitting the buildings across the park. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 5 years? Do you like it? Like doesn't factor into it. It's functional. Everything with you is functional, isn't it? She set down her cup. The apartment, the marriage, probably the coffee. What's your point? No point, just an observation. She pushed away from the counter. I'll get out of your way. I'm sure you have important empire building to do. But she didn't move, just stood there, studying him with that unnerving directness. What? He demanded. I'm trying to figure you out. Don't bother. Too late. She smiled, and it was the first genuine one he'd seen. It transformed her face completely, made her look younger, softer, dangerous in an entirely different way. You're an interesting puzzle, Damien Moretti. All these defenses and walls and calculated moves, but underneath, she trailed off. What? I haven't decided yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. She picked up her cup again. I guess we'll find out. Then she did leave, taking her coffee with her. Damien stood alone in the kitchen, his own coffee going cold in his hand, and tried to remember the last time someone had called him a puzzle, had treated him like something to be solved rather than feared. He came up empty. The rest of the day followed a pattern. Damien buried himself in work, calls to make, operations to oversee, money to move. The machinery of his empire required constant attention, and he gave it gladly. This was familiar, controllable. Lena, meanwhile, made herself at home. He'd see her occasionally, walking through the living room with a book, sitting on the terrace with her tablet. Once, inexplicably, doing yoga in the room with the best morning light. She didn't ask permission, didn't check with him before occupying spaces he'd gotten used to thinking of as his. She just existed. Took up residence in his life like she'd always been there. It should have bothered him more than it did. That evening, Damien emerged from his office to find Lena at the piano. He hadn't even realized she could play. The instrument was a Steinway, worth more than some houses, and mostly decorative. Another symbol of wealth and taste he didn't actually use. She played well. Some classical piece he didn't recognize, her fingers moving across the keys with practiced confidence. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, the first casual clothes he'd seen her in. Made her look approachable, almost normal. He watched from the shadows and for a moment let himself just listen. The music filled the penthouse's great room, softening all the hard edges he'd built into the space. When she finished, the silence felt heavier than before. You're staring, she said without turning around. You play well. Thank you. My mother insisted on lessons, said every proper young woman should know how to entertain. She ran her fingers over the keys without pressing them. Of course, she probably imagined me playing at society events, not in a mafia boss's penthouse. Is that what you think you're doing? Entertaining me? I think I'm living my life. The fact that it happens to be in your penthouse is just geography. She finally turned to look at him. Does it bother you? Does what bother me? That I'm not intimidated. That I'm not hiding in my room waiting for permission to exist. The honest answer was yes. It bothered him significantly. His entire life was built on people knowing their place, respecting boundaries, following unspoken rules. Lena seemed to have missed that memo entirely. You're here because of a contract, he said instead. Don't mistake that for belonging. Something flickered across her face. Hurt, maybe. But it was gone too quickly to be sure. Message received. I'll try to be more invisible. She stood, moved past him toward the hallway. This time he caught her arm. That's not what I meant. No? She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at him. Then what did you mean? Damien didn't have an answer. Didn't know what he'd meant, only that the words had come out wrong, harsher than intended. He dropped his hand. Nothing. Forget it. You're very good at that, aren't you? Shutting down. Closing off. She crossed her arms. But here's the thing, Damien. We're stuck with each other. Your alliance needs this marriage to work, at least publicly. So we can either spend the next however many years playing this Cold War game, or we can try to find some kind of... She searched for the word. Détente. Détente. Peaceful coexistence. You do your thing, I do mine, and we try not to make each other actively miserable in the process. It was more than he'd expected, more than he deserved probably, after the way he'd handled this entire situation. And what does that look like? He asked. I don't know. Maybe we have dinner together occasionally. Actually talk instead of trading barbed comments. Try to see each other as humans instead of, she gestured vaguely. Whatever this is. That's simple. Nothing about this is simple, but it's a start. She waited. Unless you'd prefer the Cold War? Damien thought about it, about long, silent dinners, about avoiding her in his own home, about years of careful distance and calculated indifference, about never hearing her play piano again. Dinner, he said finally. Tomorrow night, 7. Her eyebrows rose. Are you asking or ordering? Does it matter? To me? Yes. He bit back his first response. Tried again. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow evening? A small smile played at her lips. See? That wasn't so hard. Yes, Damien, I'd like that. She left him standing there, already second-guessing the decision. But when 7 o'clock rolled around the next night, he found himself in the dining room, wearing a suit despite the fact that it was just the two of them, and trying to remember the last time he'd been nervous about anything. Lena arrived exactly on time, wearing a green dress that made her eyes look even more gold. She'd done something different with her hair, or maybe he was just noticing it more. The meal was catered. He'd had his assistant arrange it. Nothing too formal, but not casual either. A balance. They sat across from each other at the long table, and for a few minutes just ate in silence. Then Lena said, "Tell me something true." He looked up. "What?" "Something true. About you, not the mafia boss, not the cold businessman. You." Set down her fork. "I'll go first if it helps. Something true about me is that I hate asparagus, but I eat it anyway because I'm too stubborn to admit I don't like something that's supposedly good for me." Despite himself, Damien's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "That's your truth? Asparagus? I'm starting small, building trust. Your turn." He considered. What could he tell her that was true but not damaging? Not weak? "I don't sleep well," he said finally. "Haven't in years." Her expression softened. "Why not?" "Because the kind of life I lead doesn't allow for rest." "That sounds exhausting." "It's necessary." "Maybe." She took a sip of wine. "Or maybe you've just convinced yourself it is because the alternative, actually letting your guard down, is too terrifying." There it was again. That ability to cut right through his bullshit and find the thing he didn't want to acknowledge. "You do that a lot," he said. "Do what?" "Say things that are too accurate, too close." "Does it bother you?" "Yes." "Good." She smiled. "Someone should bother you, Damien. You're too comfortable being untouchable." They finished dinner, and somehow it turned into conversation. Real conversation, not the careful verbal fencing they'd been doing since the wedding. She told him about Stanford, about her thesis on risk assessment in criminal enterprises. He found himself actually interested, asking questions. He told her about building his empire from nothing, though he left out the bloodiest parts. She listened like she was assembling a picture of him piece by piece. When the meal ended, neither of them moved to leave. "This wasn't terrible," Lena said. "High praise." "For me, it is." She stood, came around to his side of the table, held out her hand. "Same time next week?" He looked at her hand. Taking it would mean something, would acknowledge that this détente was working, that she was getting past his defenses. He took it anyway. Her hand was warm in his, and she held on a beat longer than necessary before letting go. "Good night, Damien." "Good night." He watched her leave, and only when he was alone did he allow himself to acknowledge the truth. He was in serious trouble, because Lena Ashford wasn't just getting past his defenses. She was making him want to let her. The dinners became a pattern. Not every night, Damien's schedule didn't allow for that kind of regularity, but often enough that he started anticipating them. Started noticing when it had been too long since they'd sat across from each other and talked about nothing important. That realization bothered him more than he wanted to admit. 3 weeks into the marriage, he came home late from a meeting that had gone sideways. Some punk crew from Brooklyn thinking they could move product through his territory without permission. The conversation had required his personal attention, the kind that left blood on his knuckles and a reminder about respect echoing in a warehouse. He'd cleaned up before coming home, but his shirt still had a spatter he'd missed. He was heading to his room when he saw light coming from the kitchen. Lena stood at the counter in pajama pants and a tank top, making tea. Her hair was piled on top of her head in a messy knot, and she wasn't wearing makeup. She looked younger, softer. She looked up when he entered. Rough night? Something like that. Her eyes went to his shirt, to the dark stain near his collar. She didn't ask, didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. You want some tea? I don't drink tea. Maybe you should start. It's better for insomnia than whatever you've been doing. She pulled down another mug without waiting for his answer. Chamomile. Nothing fancy. Damien should have gone to his room, should have maintained the distance he'd let slip lately. Instead, he sat at the kitchen island and watched her move through the space like she belonged there. She set the mug in front of him, sat across from him with her own. You don't have to tell me what happened, she said. But you also don't have to pretend it didn't. I'm not pretending anything. No? Because you walked in here looking like you'd just been to hell, and now you're sitting there with your CEO face on, like everything's controlled and fine. He wrapped his hands around the mug, felt the heat through the ceramic. It is fine. Damien. She said his name like a sigh. You can't possibly think I don't know what you do, what you are. And that doesn't bother you? Would it matter if it did? She took a sip of her tea. I knew what I was getting into when I agreed to this. My family isn't exactly clean either. Different scale, maybe, but same fundamental business. The Ashfords deal in politics and influence, not violence. You think there's a difference? Violence is just influence by another name. She set down her mug. Besides, I'm not naive enough to think you got where you are by being nice. She paused, choosing words. I'd rather you didn't lie about it. Pretend with everyone else if you have to, not with me. Something in his chest loosened, just a fraction. Why? Because I'm your wife. And maybe that started as a transaction, but it doesn't have to stay that way. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to change. I'm just asking you to be honest. Damien stared at her across the kitchen island, this woman who should have been afraid of him, and somehow wasn't. Who looked at him like he was a person instead of a weapon. Someone thought they could operate in my territory without permission, he said quietly. They were wrong. Are they still breathing? For now. Good. That shows restraint. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. See? Honesty. Not so hard. They finished their tea in silence, but it was different than before. Less careful. More real. When Lena stood to rinse her mug, Damien found himself asking, Why did you agree to this? Really? She paused, her back to him. Because I was tired of being invisible. Of being the Ashford they kept hidden because I wasn't polished enough, or connected enough, or whatever enough. She turned around. At least here I'm seen, even if it's just as the woman you didn't want to marry. That's not... He stopped, started again. I didn't know what I was getting. That's not the same as not wanting. Isn't it? No. The word came out harder than he intended. If I'd known, things would have been different. How? He stood, came around the island, stopped close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes. I would have been more careful. Why? Because you're dangerous. She laughed, the sound low and genuine. Me? I'm not the one who just came back from threatening people. Different kind of dangerous. He reached up, almost touched her face, then dropped his hand. The kind I don't know how to handle. Lena's expression shifted, became something quieter, more vulnerable. You're not the only one who's scared? You don't seem scared. I'm terrified, she said simply. I'm living with a man who could destroy me in about 20 different ways, and I'm trying to act like it doesn't matter. Like I'm not constantly wondering what happens when you get bored, or angry, or just tired of pretending I'm worth keeping around. The confession hit him harder than he expected. He'd been so focused on protecting himself that he hadn't considered she might need the same thing. I wouldn't, he said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He did touch her face this time, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. He searched for the right word, came up empty. You matter. It was the closest he could get to the truth, that she'd gotten under his skin in a way he didn't fully understand, that he thought about her when he should have been thinking about business, that coming home to a dark, empty penthouse had started feeling wrong, Lena's hand came up to cover his. This is a bad idea, isn't it? Probably. We should keep our distance, keep things professional. We should. Neither of them moved. The kiss, when it happened, felt inevitable, like they'd been moving toward it since the wedding. Since before that, maybe. Since the moment she'd looked at him with those whiskey eyes and refused to be dismissed. Her mouth was soft and warm, and she tasted like chamomile tea. She made a small sound, her hands fisting in his shirt, and something in Damien's carefully controlled world tilted sideways. He pulled back before things could go further, before he could forget all the reasons this was complicated. Lena, don't. She pressed a finger to his lips. Don't analyze it or explain it away. Just let it be what it is. And what is it? I don't know yet. She stepped back, putting distance between them. But I think we just made things a lot more interesting. She left him standing in the kitchen, his heart doing things it had no business doing, and his mind racing through implications and consequences and all the ways this could blow up. He should have shut it down, should have reinforced the walls and reminded himself, that this was business. But the problem was, it had stopped feeling like business weeks ago. The next morning, Damien woke to his phone buzzing with a call from his lawyer. Some complication with a property acquisition that needed his immediate attention. He spent the morning dealing with contracts and negotiations, grateful for the distraction. When he finally emerged from his office around 2, he found Lena in the great room, surrounded by fabric samples and design books. What's this? She looked up, pushing her glasses he hadn't seen since the wedding, higher on her nose. I'm redecorating. You're what? Redecorating. This space is... She gestured around at the cold, modern aesthetic he'd paid a designer 6 figures to create. Soulless, it feels like a hotel lobby, or a morgue. I like it this way. You like that it keeps people at a distance. There's a difference. She held up 2 fabric swatches. Which one? I don't care. Wrong answer. Pick one. Damien stared at her, at the determined set of her jaw, and realized she wasn't asking permission. She was involving him in something she'd already decided to do. It should have made him angry, should have triggered all his control issues and territorial instincts. Instead, he pointed to the one on the left. That one. It's less ugly. She smiled. See? You do have opinions. They're just buried under layers of, I don't care about anything. I care about things. Name one, besides your empire and your reputation. He opened his mouth. Closed it. She had a point. Lena stood, came over to him. Damien, you live in this beautiful space and you treat it like a storage unit. When's the last time you actually enjoyed being here? I'm not sentimental about real estate. I'm not talking about sentiment. I'm talking about actually living instead of just existing between meetings. She touched his arm lightly. Let me do this. Let me make this place feel like a home instead of a fortress. And if I say no, then I'll do it anyway, and you'll be mad about it for a week before you forget to care. She tilted her head. Or you can say yes, participate in the process, and maybe find out that having a say in your own environment isn't actually that terrible. He should have said no, should have put his foot down and reminded her who owned this place. Fine, but nothing too colorful, and the office stays exactly as it is. Her whole face lit up. Thank you, you won't regret this. I already do. But he didn't. Not really. Not when he saw how excited she got about throw pillows and curtains and other things he'd never given a second thought to. Not when she asked his opinion on every decision, genuinely wanting to know what he thought, even when his answer was, I don't know. Over the next week, the penthouse slowly transformed. Nothing dramatic. Lena had good instincts. She kept the bones of the design but added warmth. Softer textures. Art that was actually interesting instead of just expensive. Plants that somehow survived despite Damien's certainty they'd be dead within days. The living room got a new rug, deep charcoal with hints of blue that picked up the twilight over the park. The harsh overhead lighting was supplemented with lamps that created pools of warmth. Books appeared on shelves that had previously held only decorative objects. Where did all these come from? He asked one evening, running his fingers over the spines. Some are mine, some I bought. Lena appeared beside him, looking pleased with herself. You can actually read them, by the way. They're not just for show. I don't have time to read. Maybe you should make time. She pulled one down, handed it to him. Try this one. It's about game theory and strategic thinking. Right up your alley. He took it, more to humor her than anything else. But that night, unable to sleep as usual, he opened it and found himself pulled in. The author's arguments were sharp, interesting. He read for 2 hours before finally setting it aside. The next morning at breakfast, another new development, somehow Lena had gotten him to start eating actual meals instead of just coffee. He mentioned something from the book. Her smile could have powered half the city. The following Saturday, Marco called about a situation that needed handling. Some dispute between two of their operations that had escalated to the point of violence. Damien was getting ready to head out when Lena appeared in his doorway. You're leaving? Business. Will you be back for dinner? He hadn't been planning on it. These situations usually took hours, but something in her expression made him pause. Why? Because I made a reservation. At that place you mentioned liking. She crossed her arms. But if you're busy, I can cancel. Damien checked his watch. The situation was serious, but not urgent. Marco could handle the preliminaries. What time? 8. I'll be back by 7:30. He made it with 10 minutes to spare, still wearing the tension of the afternoon's negotiations, but trying to shake it off. Lena was ready, wearing a dark blue dress that made her look elegant and untouchable. They took his car, his driver handling the Manhattan traffic with practiced ease. The restaurant was one of the few places Damien actually enjoyed. Quiet, exclusive, run by a chef who knew better than to make a fuss over his presence. The owner, Antonio, greeted them personally. Mr. Moretti, and you must be Mrs. Moretti. Welcome. Something about hearing Lena referred to as Mrs. Moretti made Damien's chest feel strange, tight, like his heart was trying to relearn how to beat. They were seated at his usual table, in the back corner where he could see the whole room. Old habits. Lena looked around, taking in the intimate space with appreciation. This is lovely. How did you find it? Antonio's father used to run a place in my old neighborhood. When he opened this, I made sure he had the right protections. And in exchange? In exchange, he makes the best osso buco in the city and doesn't ask questions when I need a quiet place to meet. So it's a business relationship. Everything's a business relationship. She gave him a look. Is this a business dinner? No, he admitted. This is something else. They ordered, and over wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent, they talked. Really talked. Not about the surface things, but about the complicated stuff underneath. Do you ever want out? She asked at one point. Out of what? This life. The violence, the constant need to control everything. Damien considered the question seriously. I don't know how to be anything else. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He turned his wine glass, watching the light catch in the dark liquid. I built this empire from nothing. It's who I am. No, Lena said quietly. It's what you do. Who you are is underneath that. And who do you think I am? I'm still figuring that out. But I know you're more than just a man who threatens people for a living. She leaned forward slightly. You're smart, controlled, sometimes funny when you forget to maintain the scary face. You're actually kind of thoughtful when you let yourself be. Thoughtful. You asked what I liked for breakfast and made sure it was stocked. You remembered that I don't drink red wine. You notice things. She paused. Most people wouldn't expect that from someone like you. Someone like me. A crime boss. A man who operates outside the law. Someone everyone's afraid of. She met his eyes. But I'm not afraid of you, Damien. Maybe I should be. Maybe that makes me stupid, but I'm not. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, saw Marco's name, ignored it. It buzzed again. You should get that, Lena said. It can wait. Can it? He looked at her, at the understanding in her expression, and felt something shift. She knew what his life was. Accepted it, even. Didn't demand he choose between her and the empire he'd built. He answered. What? Marco's voice was tense. We have a problem. The Volkov crew. They hit one of our warehouses. Damien's expression went cold. Casualties? 2 dead, 3 wounded. I'll be there in 20. He ended the call, signaled for the check. The Volkovs? Lena asked quietly. He looked at her sharply. How do you know that name? I pay attention, and I'm not stupid. She stood when he did. What are you going to do? What I always do. Send a message. In the car, Lena sat beside him in silence. Damien's mind was already working through options, strategies, the kind of response that would end this before it became a war. Drop me at home first, Lena said. No. She turned to look at him. No? You're safer with me right now. The Volkovs might know about the wedding, might see you as leverage. His jaw tightened. I won't risk that. So I'm coming to, what? A warehouse where people were just killed? You're staying in the car with the driver and 2 guards. You'll be fine. And you? I'll be fine too. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. The warehouse was in Queens, far enough from Manhattan to avoid attention, but still firmly in Damien's territory. When they arrived, the scene was controlled chaos. His people had secured the perimeter. The bodies had been moved. But the anger was thick enough to taste. Marco approached the car as soon as it stopped. Boss, wait here, Damien told Lena. Then to the driver, keep the doors locked. Anyone comes near this car who isn't me or Marco, you know what to do. He stepped out into the cold night air. His mind already shifted into the mode that had kept him alive for years. Cold, calculating, capable of anything. Marco filled him in as they walked. Security footage shows 5 men. They knew what they were doing, in and out in under 10 minutes. What did they take? Nothing. This was about the statement. Damien's eyes narrowed. Then we make a bigger one. They spent the next hour planning. Damien's voice was calm, almost conversational, as he outlined exactly what would happen to the Volkov operations over the next 48 hours. Not violence for its own sake. Strategic hits, calculated losses. A reminder about consequences. When he finally returned to the car, Lena was exactly where he'd left her. She looked up as he slid in beside her, and he saw her taking in the shift in him, the cold mask he wore when doing business. Home, he told the driver. They didn't speak on the drive back. Damien was still running through plans, contingencies, making calls to set things in motion. Beside him, Lena sat quietly, not interrupting, not demanding attention. Back at the penthouse, he headed straight for his office. He had hours of work ahead of him, coordinating the response, making sure everything was handled precisely. Lena followed him. Damien. Not now. Yes, now. She moved to stand in front of his desk. Talk to me. There's nothing to talk about. This is business. Those were your people who died tonight. Are you really going to stand there and pretend you don't feel anything? Something in him snapped. What do you want me to say? That I'm sad? Angry? That it tears me up inside every time someone dies in this war I'm running? He stood, leaned forward. I feel all of that and more. But feelings don't keep people alive. Strategy does. Control does. So yes, I'm going to compartmentalize and do what needs to be done, because that's how you survive in this world. Lena didn't flinch, didn't back away. I'm not asking you to fall apart. I'm asking you to acknowledge that you're human, that this costs you something. It costs me everything. The words came out rawer than he intended. Every single day it costs everything, and I pay it because it's what I signed up for, what I chose. He ran a hand through his hair. But don't mistake survival for indifference. I know the names of those men, know their families, and when this is over, I'll make sure those families are taken care of. But right now, I have to focus on making sure no one else ends up dead. What? She came around his desk, and before he could process what was happening, she wrapped her arms around him, just held him. Damien froze. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him, couldn't remember the last time he'd let someone close enough to try. Slowly, his arms came up to return the embrace. She was warm and solid and real, and for just a moment, he let himself take comfort in that. I'm sorry, she said quietly against his chest, for pushing. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. He rested his chin on top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, something with vanilla. It's fine. It's not, but we can pretend it is if that helps. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh. You're very strange. So I've been told. She pulled back enough to look up at him. Go do what you need to do. I'll be here when you're done. Those words shouldn't have mattered as much as they did. Damien worked through the night. By dawn, plans were in motion. The Volkovs would wake up to find 3 of their operations shut down. Their biggest earner in police custody, thanks to an anonymous tip, and a very clear message about what happened when you touched Damien Moretti's territory. When he finally emerged from his office, exhausted and running on fumes, he found Lena asleep on the couch in the great room. She'd changed into comfortable clothes at some point, brought a blanket out, waiting, just like she'd said. He stood there watching her sleep, and something in his chest cracked further. This woman who had every reason to be terrified of him, of this life, had chosen to stay, to wait, to offer comfort even when he'd given her nothing but walls and distance. Damien picked up the blanket that had slipped off her shoulders, pulled it back up. His hand hovered near her face, almost touching, before he pulled it back. Then he went to his room, stripped off his clothes, and fell into bed. For the first time in years, he slept without nightmares. When Damien woke, this afternoon sun was slanting through his windows at an angle that told him he'd slept far longer than usual. He checked his phone. Nearly 2 in the afternoon. The last time he'd slept past 9 was never. Messages from Marco confirmed everything was proceeding as planned. The Volkovs were scrambling, trying to figure out how their operations had fallen apart so quickly. Good. Let them scramble. He found Lena in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with focused precision. She looked up when he entered, her expression carefully neutral. You're awake. Apparently. He moved to the coffee maker, found a fresh pot waiting. You made coffee. I make coffee every morning. You're just usually already gone by the time I get up. She went back to chopping. There's food if you're hungry. Actual food, not just caffeine. He poured a cup, leaned against the counter watching her work. She'd pulled her hair back into a ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and one of his old Columbia t-shirts. He had no idea how she'd gotten it, but seeing her in his clothes did something to his brain chemistry. That's my shirt. I know, mine were all in the wash and I got cold. She glanced at him. Want it back? No. Good, because it's comfortable and I'm keeping it. She scraped the vegetables into a pan, added oil. How are you feeling? Fine. Damien, what? She turned to face him fully. I'm trying to have an actual conversation. You know, where people ask questions and give honest answers instead of deflecting with one-word responses. He took a drink of coffee, buying time. I'm tired, but the situation is handled. That's better. She turned back to the stove. Thank you for telling me. They fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Lena cooked, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the kitchen. Damien drank his coffee and watched her move through the space with easy familiarity. This was her territory now, he realized. She'd claimed it without asking, and he'd let her. When had that happened? There's a gala next week, he said abruptly. Fundraiser for the Arts Council. I have to attend. Okay? I need you to come with me. She looked over her shoulder. As your wife? Yes. Will people know? About us, I mean. That we're married. Some will. It's not exactly a secret. He set down his cup. But this will be the first time we're seen together publicly. People will talk. Let them talk. She plated the food, some kind of pasta situation that looked far more elaborate than anything he'd eat normally. I can handle a room full of rich people making judgments. It's not just rich people. It's my world. People who know what I do, who I am. He paused. Some of them will try to use you to get to me. Then I won't let them. She set a plate in front of him. Eat. You need actual nutrients. He looked at the food, then at her. You don't have to take care of me. I'm not taking care of you. I'm feeding another human who happens to live in my space. But her smile was soft. Besides, someone has to make sure you don't subsist entirely on coffee and scotch. Despite himself, Damien felt his mouth curve slightly. That's a perfectly adequate diet. It's a terrible diet, and you know it. She sat across from him with her own plate. Now eat before I start lecturing you about nutrition. The food was good, better than good. He told her so, and her whole face lit up in a way that made his chest feel tight. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to domestic. Lena continued transforming the penthouse, and Damien found himself actually caring about the changes. He came home earlier than usual, not every night, but more often than before. They had dinner together when his schedule allowed, talked about everything and nothing. She asked about his business sometimes, and he found himself explaining more than he probably should. The politics of it, the chess game of power and territory. She listened with genuine interest, asked smart questions that showed she understood the complexity. "You're good at this," she said one evening. They were in the living room, her with a book and him with work he was pretending to focus on. The strategy part, seeing moves ahead. "It's necessary. It's more than that. You enjoy it." She set down her book. "The planning, outthinking people, being 10 steps ahead." He considered denying it. "Yes. That's not something to be ashamed of. I destroy lives for a living, Lena. Enjoyment seems like the wrong response. You operate in a world with certain rules. You didn't make those rules, but you've mastered them." She pulled her legs up under her. "There's a difference between enjoying strategy and enjoying violence." "Is there?" "Yes." She said it with certainty. "Do you like hurting people?" "No." "Then there's your answer." She picked up her book again. "You're not a monster, Damien. You're just a man doing what he thinks he has to do to survive." He wanted to argue, to point out all the ways she was wrong, all the things he'd done that proved he was exactly what people feared. But sitting there in the warm light of the lamps she'd chosen, with her curled up on the couch wearing his shirt again, the argument died in his throat. Maybe she was right, or maybe she was dangerously naive. He couldn't decide which scared him more. The night of the gala arrived with typical New York weather, cold and threatening snow. Damien dressed in his best suit, the one that cost more than a car and fit like it had been painted on. When he emerged from his room, Lena was waiting in the great room. She'd chosen a black dress that was elegant and understated, the kind of thing that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. Her hair was swept up, exposing her neck and shoulders. Diamond earrings, a wedding gift from someone, he couldn't remember who, caught the light. She looked like she could own the room without trying. "Will I do?" she asked, turning in a slow circle. "You'll do." His voice came out rougher than intended. "You look beautiful." Something in her expression softened. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." The gala was at the plaza, in the grand ballroom that had hosted everyone from presidents to royalty. Damien's people had already secured the venue, confirmed the exits, vetted the guest list. He never went anywhere without preparation. Lena took his arm as they entered, and he felt her tense slightly at the sheer scale of the event. Hundreds of people in designer clothes, drinking expensive champagne, pretending they gave a damn about the arts, while really just networking and showing off. "Breathe," he murmured. "You belong here more than half these people." "That's not particularly reassuring." "Then pretend. Confidence is 90% of the game." She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. "Better?" "Perfect." They moved through the crowd, and Damien watched Lena handle each introduction with grace. She remembered names, asked intelligent questions, laughed at bad jokes without making it seem forced. She was a natural, and he found himself wondering what else he didn't know about her. Gerald Hammond, who ran one of the largest real estate portfolios in the city and owed Damien several favors, approached with his wife in tow. "Damien, good to see you, and this must be the new Mrs. Moretti." "Lena," she said, extending her hand, "pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is ours. We heard about the wedding, of course. Quite the surprise." Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We didn't realize you were seeing anyone." "It happened quickly," Damien said smoothly. "When you know, you know." Gerald's wife, Patricia, zeroed in on Lena with predatory interest. "You're in Ashford, aren't you? Virginia's daughter?" "That's right." "I didn't realize Virginia had a daughter. She's never mentioned you at any of our events." The comment was designed to cut, to make Lena feel small and forgotten. Damien felt his jaw tighten, ready to shut it down, but Lena just smiled. "My mother and I have different ideas about what constitutes a worthwhile event. She prefers social climbing. I prefer substance." The words were delivered with perfect politeness, but the message was clear. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Gerald actually laughed. "Well said, my dear. Well said." They moved on, and Damien leaned closer to Lena. "That was impressive." That was me being nice. You should see me when I'm actually trying to insult someone. The evening progressed. More introductions, more careful conversations where people tried to figure out the angles, what this marriage meant for Damien's operations and alliances. He deflected smoothly, gave nothing away, played the game he'd been playing for years. But having Lena beside him changed the dynamic. She wasn't just decoration. She engaged, contributed, held her own in conversations about politics and economics and art. More than once, Damien caught people looking at her with reassessment in their eyes. They were dancing, some waltz the orchestra had struck up, when Jonathan Carver cut in. Jonathan was old money, old guard, and had been trying to undermine Damien's influence in certain circles for years. "May I?" he asked, already moving between them. Damien's instinct was to refuse, but that would cause a scene. He stepped back, let Jonathan take Lena's hand, and watched from the edge of the dance floor. Jonathan said something that made Lena laugh, then something else that made her expression cool. Damien couldn't hear the words, but he could read body language. Jonathan was pushing, testing boundaries. Marco appeared at his elbow. "Want me to handle it?" "No, she's fine." And she was. Lena maintained perfect composure, answering Jonathan's probes with skill. When the dance ended, she thanked him politely and made her way back to Damien. "What did he want?" Damien asked. "To see if I was as stupid as he assumed." She accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "I disappointed him." "What did he say?" "He suggested that I must not know what kind of man I married, that I should be careful because you're dangerous and unpredictable." She took a sip. "I told him I knew exactly who you are, and that unpredictable was the last word I'd use to describe you." And he got flustered because I didn't react the way he wanted. Men like that expect women to either be scared or naive. When you're neither, they don't know what to do with you. Damien studied her face, looking for cracks in the composure. Found none. "This doesn't bother you? People knowing what I do?" "Should it?" She met his eyes. "I'm not blind, Damien. I know you've done terrible things. We'll probably do more terrible things. But I also know there's more to you than that." She paused. "Unless I'm wrong. Unless the man I've been getting to know these past weeks is just another mask." "He's not." "Then that's all I need to know." She set down her champagne. "Can we leave? I'm tired of pretending to care about abstract art and charitable donations." They made their excuses, left the gala early. In the car, Lena kicked off her heels with a groan. How do women wear these things all night? Practice? Or masochism? She leaned her head back against the seat. "That was exhausting. Do you do that often?" "Often enough." "And you hate every minute of it." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Then why go?" "Because power requires presence. You can't control things from the shadows if people forget you exist. So it's theater. Everything's theater." He looked out at the city passing by. "The trick is remembering you're acting." When they got home, Lena disappeared to change. Damien loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, stood at the windows watching the city lights. Behind him, he heard her return, felt her presence before she spoke. "Thank you for tonight," she said. He turned. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, scrubbed off the makeup. She looked younger, more real. For what? For not treating me like an accessory. For letting me be part of it instead of just decoration on your arm. She came to stand beside him at the window. "I know that wasn't easy for you. You handled yourself well. I had good training. My mother might not have included me in her social circle, but she made damn sure I knew how to navigate it." Lena's reflection in the glass was thoughtful. "Do you ever wish you could walk away from all of it?" "Every day." The answer surprised them both. Damien hadn't meant to be that honest, but the words had come out before he could stop them. "Then why don't you?" she asked quietly. "Because I don't know who I'd be without it." He took a drink. "This empire, this life, it's all I've built, all I have." "That's not true." "No?" She turned to face him. "You have me, for whatever that's worth." The statement hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to unpack. Damien looked at her, at this woman who'd entered his life as a transaction and somehow become the most real thing in it. "It's worth more than you know," he said finally. Lena's hand came up to rest against his chest, right over his heart. You're scared of this. Of us. Yes. Me too. Her eyes searched his face. But I'm tired of being scared. Tired of holding back because of what might happen. Lena. She kissed him before he could finish the warning, the objection, whatever bullshit excuse he was about to give. And just like in the kitchen weeks ago, something in him cracked wide open. He kissed her back, his hands coming up to frame her face, and it felt like falling and flying at the same time. She tasted like champagne and possibility, and when she made that small sound in the back of her throat, his control shattered completely. They stumbled backward, hands pulling at clothes, mouths never separating. His jacket hit the floor. Her shirt followed. By the time they made it to his room, closer than hers, they'd left a trail of expensive fabric and abandoned restraint. The first time was desperate, frantic, months of tension finally breaking. The second time later was slower. Damien mapped every inch of her skin like he was memorizing a battle plan, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch. Afterward, she lay against his chest, her breathing evening out into sleep. Damien stared at the ceiling, his mind racing despite his body's exhaustion. He'd just crossed a line he'd sworn he wouldn't cross. Had let someone in past every defense he'd built. And the terrifying part wasn't that he'd done it. It was that he didn't regret it. Morning came with pale winter light and the sound of Lena's phone buzzing on the nightstand. She stirred, reached for it, then went very still. What is it? Damien asked. My father. She sat up, the sheet pooling at her waist. He wants to meet for lunch, today. Something in her tone put him on alert. That's a problem? I don't know, maybe. She looked at him, worry clear in her expression. He never asks to see me. Not unless something's wrong or he needs something. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. He's still my father, and... She trailed off. It's complicated. Damien understood complicated family dynamics. His own father had been dead for years, killed in the same world Damien now ruled. Where's he want to meet? The club. His usual table. She got out of bed, started gathering her clothes. I should go get ready. He watched her dress, watched the walls go back up piece by piece. Last night had changed things between them, but the world outside this room hadn't stopped turning. Do you want me to come with you? He asked. She paused in the doorway. Would you? If you need me to. She seemed to struggle with the answer. No, this is something I should handle alone, but thank you for offering. After she left, Damien got up, showered, tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had his own work to handle, reports to review, decisions to make. But he couldn't focus. He called Marco. I need you to put someone on Lena. Already done, boss. Had a tail on her since the wedding. Without my authorization? You would have ordered it eventually. I just saved you the trouble. Marco's voice carried a hint of amusement. She's meeting her father at the university club. 2 security with her. Keep me updated. Always do. Damien tried to work, but the minutes crawled by. He kept checking his phone, waiting for Marco's update. When it finally came, the message was brief. Meeting normal. Subject returning home. He relaxed slightly, went back to the contract he'd been pretending to read. An hour later, Lena returned. He heard her come in, heard her pause in the hallway. When she appeared in his office doorway, her face was carefully blank. How was lunch? He asked. Enlightening. She came into the room, closed the door behind her. My father wanted to congratulate me on the marriage, said I'd done well securing an alliance with the Moretti family. That's all? No. She sat in the chair across from his desk. He also wanted to make sure I understood my role, that I was supposed to be gathering information, building influence, making myself useful to both families. Damien's jaw tightened. He wants you to spy on me. Essentially, yes, though he phrased it more diplomatically. She met his eyes. I told him to go to hell. Lena, not in those words. But I made it clear that I'm not his asset to deploy. That this marriage might have started as politics, but it's more than that now. Her hands were clenched in her lap. He didn't take it well. What did he say? That I was being naive. That feelings have no place in this world. That I need to remember where my loyalties lie. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then he threatened to cut me off completely if I don't cooperate. Damien stood, came around the desk. He can't hurt you here. You're under my protection now. I know, that's what I told him. She looked up at him. But it still felt like losing the last piece of my old life, the last connection to my family. He pulled her up into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his chest. You have a new family now. Do I? Her voice was muffled. Or do I just have a husband who tolerates me? You have more than that. He tilted her face up, made her look at him. Last night wasn't tolerance, Lena. Last night was me finally admitting that you matter, that this matters. How much? More than it should. More than is safe. He kissed her forehead. Your father's right about one thing. Feelings are dangerous in this world. But I'm done pretending I don't have them. She kissed him then, soft and searching, and Damien kissed her back with everything he couldn't find words for. When they pulled apart, her eyes were bright. So what do we do now? She asked. We keep going. We figure it out as we go. He brushed a strand of hair back from her face. But we do it together. No more sides, no more divided loyalties. Just us. Just us, she repeated like she was testing the words. I like the sound of that. The next few weeks were the calmest Damien had experienced in years. The Volkov situation had settled into an uneasy truce. His operations ran smoothly, and at home, Lena had become a constant presence he found himself craving. They fell into patterns. Coffee in the mornings, both of them reading their respective materials in comfortable silence. Dinners when his schedule allowed. Nights spent in his bed learning each other's bodies and boundaries. She asked questions about his work, and he found himself answering, explaining the nuances of territory disputes, the politics of alliances, the constant balancing act of power. She listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering insights that made him see things differently. You're wasted on economics, he told her one evening. They were reviewing a contract together. She'd started helping him spot potential problems, and she was damn good at it. Why's that? You have a criminal mind. You see all the angles. She looked up from the papers, eyebrow raised. Is that a compliment? In my world? Yes. Then thank you. She went back to reading, though I'm not sure my Stanford professors would agree. Your professors were teaching theory. This is practice. He pointed to a clause she'd flagged. This, for example, most lawyers wouldn't catch that loophole. Most lawyers aren't looking for ways to screw people over. Exactly. You think like someone who expects betrayal. That's valuable. She set down the contract. Is that what you see when you look at me? Someone useful? The question caught him off guard. No. Then what? Someone real. He struggled for the right words. Someone who sees me and doesn't flinch, who doesn't want anything from me except honesty. I want more than honesty, Damien. What do you want? You. All of you. Not just the parts you think are acceptable. He stood, needing distance to process that. You don't know what you're asking for. Yes, I do. She followed him to the windows. I'm asking for you to stop treating this like it's temporary, like I'm going to wake up one day and realize what you are and run. You should run. But I won't. She touched his arm, gentle but firm. I'm not going anywhere, Damien. The sooner you accept that, the easier this gets. He wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons she was wrong, all the ways this would end badly. But standing there with her hand on his arm and the city spread out below them, the arguments felt hollow. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. Do what? This. Us. Let someone in. He turned to face her. I've spent my entire adult life building walls. You're asking me to tear them down. I'm not asking you to tear them down. I'm asking you to open the door and let me inside. Her eyes held his. I'm already most of the way there anyway. Might as well make it official. Despite everything, he almost smiled. You're relentless. I have to be. You're stubborn as hell. He pulled her closer, rested his forehead against hers. What if I mess this up? Then we'll figure it out, together. Her hands came up to frame his face. That's what people do when they care about each other. They stay and they work through it. I'm not good at working through things. I'm good at eliminating problems. Well, I'm not a problem you can eliminate, so you'll have to try something new. And there it was. The challenge. The dare. The absolute certainty that she wasn't going to make this easy. He kissed her, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. She kissed him back just as fiercely, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, something had shifted again. "Okay," he said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, we try this. For real. No more holding back, no more treating it like it's temporary." He met her eyes. "But you have to promise me something." "What?" "If it ever gets to be too much, the violence, the danger, the reality of what I am, you tell me. You don't just stay out of obligation or stubbornness. You promise you'll tell me." Lena was quiet for a long moment. "I promise, if you promise me the same thing." "Deal." They shook on it, solemn and slightly ridiculous, and then they were laughing. Really laughing, the tension breaking into something lighter. That night, lying in bed with Lena asleep beside him, Damien stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what his life had been like before her. The endless nights of no sleep, the cold, empty penthouse, the certainty that he'd never have anything beyond his empire. It felt like another lifetime, like it had happened to someone else. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, some situation requiring his attention. He read the message, made a decision, delegated to Marco. For once, the empire could wait until morning. He set the phone aside, pulled Lena closer. She murmured something in her sleep, settled against him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Damien Moretti felt something dangerous. He felt happy. Happiness, Damien discovered, made him careless. Not in business. He was still sharp there, still 10 steps ahead of everyone else. But with Lena, he'd let his guard down in ways that should have terrified him. Stopped checking over his shoulder when they were together, stopped calculating every word before he spoke, stopped treating every moment like a potential threat. That was his first mistake. The snow started falling on a Tuesday afternoon, lazy flakes that looked harmless enough. By evening, the Weather Service was calling it the worst storm to hit New York in a decade. The city ground to a halt, roads impassable, airports closed, the whole metropolitan area locked down under 2 feet of white. Damien stood at the windows of the penthouse, watching the snow come down in sheets that obscured even the nearest buildings. His phone had been going off constantly, operations stalled, shipments delayed, meetings canceled. The machinery of his empire brought to a standstill by frozen water. "It's beautiful," Lena said, coming to stand beside him. She had a mug of tea in her hands, was wearing those comfortable clothes she favored when it was just the two of them. "When's the last time you just watched it snow?" "Never." "Never?" "I don't watch weather. I deal with the consequences of it." He checked his phone again. Marco had managed to get most of their people to safety before the worst hit, but a few were stranded in various locations across the city. Lena took the phone from his hand, set it on the table. "The world won't end if you take a night off. You don't know that. I'm willing to risk it." She pulled him away from the window. "Come on. When's the last time you were actually trapped somewhere? No emergency exit, no backup plan, just stuck?" He thought about it, came up empty. "I don't get trapped." "Well, congratulations. Tonight you do." She smiled, and there was something playful in it that made his chest tight. "The city's shut down, your empire is on pause, and you're stuck here with me. Might as well make the best of it." Making the best of it apparently involved Lena cooking something complicated in the kitchen, while Damien sat at the counter and tried not to think about all the things that could be going wrong while he was trapped in his own penthouse. "Stop checking your phone," she said without looking up from whatever she was doing with the chicken. "I'm not." "You've looked at it 4 times in the last 10 minutes. She glanced at him. "Marco's handled worse than a snowstorm. Your operations won't collapse because you're unreachable for one night. You don't know how fragile the balance is. One wrong move, one missed opportunity. One night of peace won't destroy what you've built." She pointed a wooden spoon at him. "You want to know what I think?" "Not particularly." "I think you're scared." He looked up sharply. "Of a snowstorm?" "Of this. Being cut off from everything that lets you feel in control." She went back to cooking. "You use work as armor. As long as you're dealing with operations and territory and all the chess moves of your empire, you don't have to deal with anything real. That's psychoanalysis from someone with an economics degree. It's observation from someone who's been living with you for months. She turned to face him fully. When's the last time you just existed, Damien? Not as a boss, not as a strategist, just as a person? I don't have that luxury. Tonight you do. She moved around the counter, took his phone, and before he could stop her, powered it off completely. There. Now you're really stuck. He should have been angry. Should have taken the phone back, turned it on, reasserted control. Instead, he just looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, and felt something in him give way. You're going to regret this when something goes catastrophically wrong. Then we'll deal with it together. She kissed him quickly. Now set the table. Dinner's almost ready. They ate in the dining room, the city invisible beyond the windows, nothing but white static, and the occasional flash of lightning from thundersnow. The food was good. Lena had a talent for making meals feel like events instead of just fuel. Tell me something, she said halfway through the meal. If you could do anything tomorrow, anything at all, what would it be? That's a pointless question. Humor me, Damien considered. I'd end the Castellano situation permanently. They've been pushing at my territory for months, and I'm tired of playing defensive. That's not what I meant. I mean something for you. Not for the Empire, not for business. Something you'd want to do just because. He didn't have an answer. Couldn't think of a single thing he wanted that wasn't tied to power or control or keeping what he'd built. That's depressing, Lena said quietly. It's realistic. No, it's sad. You've spent so long being the Empire that you've forgotten there's supposed to be a person underneath. She set down her fork. What did you want to be when you were a kid? Before all of this? Alive? The answer came out flat. I wanted to make it to 18. That was the goal. Her expression shifted, something softer moving through it. Tell me about that. About before. There's nothing to tell. Damien. He sighed, pushed food around his plate. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen when it actually lived up to the name. My father was a mid-level enforcer for the Galante family. My mother left when I was 6. I learned early that the world was divided into people with power and people who got crushed by it. So you decided to have power. I decided to survive. Power was just the most effective tool. He took a drink of wine. By the time I was 16, I was running collections. By 20, I'd taken over 3 territories and eliminated anyone who stood in my way. By 25, I owned half of Manhattan's underground. And now you own all of it. Most of it. He met her eyes. Does that bother you, knowing what I did to get here? Should it? Most people would think so. I'm not most people. She stood, came around to his side of the table. I knew what you were when I married you. Knowing the details doesn't change anything. It should. Why? Because you think I'm too innocent to handle the truth? She straddled his lap, her hands coming up to frame his face. I'm not some sheltered princess, Damien. I know what violence looks like, what desperation does to people. You survived the only way you knew how. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it human. She kissed him, soft and searching. You're not a monster. You're just a man who learned to be harder than the world that tried to break him. He pulled her closer, buried his face against her neck, and for a moment let himself just feel. The warmth of her. The steady beat of her heart. The impossible reality that she knew what he was and stayed anyway. I don't deserve you, he said against her skin. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They moved to the living room after dinner, Lena putting on music while Damien built a fire in the fireplace he'd never actually used. The wood was probably decorative, but it burned well enough, throwing warm light across the room. Lena curled up on the couch, watching the flames. This is nice. Domestic. Domestic, he repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign in his mouth. Yeah, normal couple stuff. Dinner, fire, music. No business, no threats, no violence. She looked at him. Do you hate it? No. And he didn't. That was the strange part. Sitting here with her, watching snow fall and fire burn, he felt something close to peace. It's different. Different good or different bad? I don't know yet. She laughed. At least you're honest. She patted the couch beside her. Come sit. You're too far away. He sat, and she immediately arranged herself against him, her head on his shoulder. It should have felt confining, uncomfortable. Instead, it felt right in a way that scared him. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "You will, anyway." "Fair point." She traced patterns on his chest, idle and soothing. "Do you ever think about leaving, just walking away from all of it?" "Every day." "Really?" "Really?" He ran his fingers through her hair. "But wanting something and being able to have it are different things. I can't just walk away. Too many people depend on me. Too many enemies would see it as weakness and move in." "What if you could, though? What if there was a way to get out safely?" "Then I'd—" He trailed off, actually considering it. "I don't know. I've never let myself think that far." "Think now." He closed his eyes, tried to imagine a life without the constant weight of the empire. Somewhere quiet, away from the city, maybe near water. The words felt strange, like he was describing someone else's fantasy. "Somewhere I could just be instead of constantly defending." That sounds nice. It's not realistic. Maybe not now, but someday? She tilted her head to look up at him. "I'd like that. A life where we're not always waiting for the next crisis." "Lena, you know that's not—" "I know it's not how things work. I know your world doesn't let people leave." She sat up, turned to face him. "But I need to know there's an endgame. That this isn't just empire building until you get killed or arrested or whatever happens to people in your position." The words hit harder than he expected. "You think about that? Me dying?" "Of course I do. I'm married to a man who deals in violence for a living. The thought crosses my mind." Her voice was steady, but he could see the fear underneath. "I need to know that you're thinking about more than just the next territory grab. That you see a future that isn't just more of the same." Damien didn't know what to say. He'd never thought beyond the empire, never let himself imagine something different, because imagining meant hoping, and hope was dangerous. "I'm working on something," he said finally, "a way to legitimize most of the operations. It'll take years, but eventually, most of what I do could be legal. Or legal enough." "Really? I'm not an idiot. This life has an expiration date. Either I find a way out, or I end up dead or in prison." He pulled her back against him. "I'd prefer option one." "Me too." She was quiet for a moment. "What would you do? If you could go legitimate?" "Real estate, probably. Private equity. I've got enough capital to build something clean." He'd been thinking about this more than he wanted to admit. It would take time, years of transitioning operations, setting up proper businesses, making the right connections. But it's possible. Maybe. That's better than no. She kissed his jaw. "I'll help however I can. I'm good with numbers, remember?" "I remember." He tightened his arms around her. "But Lena, even if I go legitimate, I'll always have enemies. People don't forget what you were." "I don't care about that. I care about you having a life that's more than just survival." She looked up at him. "You deserve that. To be more than just the empire you built." He wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that he was the empire. That there was no separation between who he was and what he'd built. But sitting there with her in his arms, with firelight dancing across her face and snow falling outside, he wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe there was more to him than the violence and the power plays. Maybe that part of him had just been buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "I love you." The words came out before he'd fully processed them. He felt Lena go still, felt the moment stretch out between them. "What?" she whispered. "I love you." He said it again, more certain this time. "I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And I'm tired of pretending I don't." Her eyes filled with tears. "Damien, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You asked what I want for me. This. You. This life we're building between the chaos. That's what I want." "I love you too." The words came out choked. "I have for weeks. I was just waiting for you to catch up." He kissed her then, tasting salt and relief and something that felt dangerously close to hope. She kissed him back with everything she had, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience anymore. wasn't just an arrangement that had accidentally become something more. This was real, terrifying and complicated, and absolutely real. They made love there in front of the fire, slow and intense, learning each other all over again now that the words had been said. Afterward, wrapped in blankets with Lena half asleep against his chest, Damien stared at the dying fire and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd just done. He'd given her power over him, the kind of power that could destroy him more completely than any rival ever could. If she wanted to hurt him now, she knew exactly where to aim. But somehow, that didn't scare him as much as it should have. The snow fell through the night, and the city stayed locked down. Damien woke early, years of habit overriding comfort. Lena was still asleep, her face peaceful in the early light filtering through the white-covered windows. He watched her for a long moment, memorizing the sight, the way her hair spread across the pillow, the slight curve of her mouth, like she was dreaming something pleasant, the absolute trust in the way she slept beside a man who'd killed more people than he could count. His phone was still off. Lena had hidden it somewhere while he was distracted with her. He should have been anxious, should have been desperate to reconnect with his operations. Instead, he felt oddly calm. The Empire would survive one day without him. And if it didn't, maybe that was a sign it was too fragile anyway. He slipped out of bed, pulled on clothes, made coffee. By the time Lena emerged, looking rumpled and beautiful, he had breakfast started, or at least his version of breakfast, which mostly involved not burning the eggs. "You're cooking," she said, sounding delighted. "Actual cooking." "Don't get excited. It's probably terrible." "It's perfect." She came up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "Last night was perfect." "Which part?" "All of it. The dinner, the fire, the conversation." She paused. "The part where you told me you loved me." He turned in her arms. "I meant it." "I know. That's what makes it perfect." She kissed him softly. "I'm not going to say this is easy, or that I'm not scared of what loving you means, but I'm done pretending this is anything less than it is." "And what is it?" "Everything." She said it simply, like it was obvious. "You're everything to me, Damien, and I think I'm everything to you, even if that terrifies you." He couldn't argue with that. She'd become the center of his world so gradually he hadn't noticed until she was already there, essential and irreplaceable. They spent the day in the penthouse, the storm still raging outside. Lena read while Damien finally turned his phone back on and dealt with the accumulated messages. Nothing catastrophic. Marco had handled everything smoothly, as expected. But going through the messages, Damien felt something shift in his perspective. These problems that had seemed urgent yesterday felt smaller now, more manageable, like he'd gained distance from the Empire without even trying. "You're different," Lena observed from the couch. "How so?" "Less tense, yeah, you're reading those messages, but you don't look like you're about to murder someone." "I'm always about to murder someone. That's my baseline." She laughed. "Fair. But still, you seem lighter." He considered that. She was right. The constant weight he'd carried for years felt less crushing. Not gone. It would never be gone as long as he ran the Empire, but manageable. "Maybe I'm getting soft," he said. "Or maybe you're remembering how to be human." She set down her book. "Come here." He went, sat beside her on the couch. She immediately curled into him, fitting against his side like she'd been designed for it. "This is good," she said quietly. "Us. This." "Yeah." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It is." They sat like that for a while, watching the snow fall, and Damien let himself imagine a future where this was normal, where he came home to her every night, where they built something together that wasn't just about survival or strategy. It was a dangerous fantasy, but for the first time in his life, he wanted to make it real. The storm finally broke late that evening. By morning, the city would be digging itself out, and life would return to its usual chaos. But for now, they were still isolated, still trapped in their own small world. "I don't want this to end," Lena said as they stood at the windows, watching the clouds finally start to break. "It doesn't have to." "You know what I mean. Tomorrow you'll go back to being the boss, handling operations, dealing with all the violence and politics. This," she gestured between them, "will get pushed to the side." "No, it won't." He turned her to face him. "I told you I love you. That doesn't change just because the city's running again. Doesn't it? How many times have I heard you say something's important, then watched you drop it the second business calls? The accusation stung because it was true. This is different. Prove it. How? I don't know. But if we're really doing this, if this is really everything like we said, then it has to be more than just stolen moments between crises. Her eyes were serious. I need to know you'll choose us sometimes. Choose me. Damien understood what she was asking. She wanted proof that she mattered more than the Empire, that he'd put her first when it counted. The problem was, he didn't know if he could. The Empire had been his entire life for so long that choosing anything over it felt wrong, dangerous, like inviting destruction. But looking at Lena, at the vulnerability in her eyes and the fear she was trying to hide, he realized he had to try. Okay, he said. Okay, what? Okay, I'll prove it. I don't know how yet, but I will. He pulled her closer. You matter more than the Empire, Lena. I just need to figure out how to show that without destroying everything. I'm not asking you to destroy anything. Just make room for me. For us. She rested her head against his chest. I know what you do is important. I know people depend on you, but I need to depend on you too sometimes. You can. Can I? She looked up at him. Because it feels like the Empire gets all of you, and I get whatever's left over. And lately, there's not much left. The words hit like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on not letting her too far in that he hadn't noticed he was pushing her away. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. You're right. I've been keeping you at a distance even while pretending I wasn't. Why? Because loving you is terrifying. The admission came out rough. Because if something happened to you, if I lost you, it would destroy me, and I can't afford to be destroyed. So instead you keep me at arm's length and pretend that will hurt less? I don't know what I'm doing, Lena. I'm making this up as I go. He cupped her face in his hands. All I know is that I love you, and I'm scared of how much, and I'm handling it badly. You are, she agreed, but at least you're admitting it. That's a start. They stood there in the dying light, the storm fading outside, and Damien made a decision. The Empire had owned him for years, had consumed everything he was and could have been. But Lena was asking for something the Empire never had, not his fear or his violence or his strategic mind, but his actual heart. And he was finally ready to give it to her. Starting tomorrow, things change, he said. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. He kissed her forehead. Together. Together, she repeated, like a promise. And watching her smile, feeling the warmth of her against him and the strange new lightness in his chest, Damien thought maybe they actually could figure it out, if the Empire didn't kill him first. The promise Damien made during the storm lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th morning, he woke to find 3 messages from Marco, each more urgent than the last. The Castellanos had made their move. Not the territory grab Damien had been expecting, but something worse. They'd approached 2 of his key lieutenants with offers. Better money, better positions, guaranteed safety for their families. One had reported it immediately. The other hadn't responded at all, which was answer enough. Damien was out the door before Lena woke up, his mind already running through scenarios and responses. By the time she called him 3 hours later, he was in a warehouse in Brooklyn, watching Marco question the lieutenant who'd gone quiet. He let the call go to voicemail, then the next one, and the one after that. By evening, he had the situation contained. The disloyal lieutenant was handled, not killed, but sent away with a very clear message about what happened to people who betrayed Damien Moretti. The Castellanos received their own message, delivered in the form of a significant financial hit to one of their shipping operations. When Damien finally returned to the penthouse after midnight, exhausted and still running on adrenaline, Lena was waiting in the living room. She looked up from her book when he entered, and her expression was carefully blank. Hey, he said. Hey yourself. She closed the book. Rough day? You could say that. I tried calling. I know. I'm sorry. Things got complicated. They always do. She stood, and he saw the tension in her shoulders. You promised things would change. They will. This was just an emergency. I know. She walked past him toward the hallway. There are always emergencies, Damien. That's the problem. He caught her arm. Lena, wait. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You chose the Empire over me. Again. She pulled free, but gently. I'm not even angry. I'm just tired. What do you want me to do? Ignore a direct threat? Let the Castellanos think they can poach my people without consequences? I want you to remember that I exist when you're making those choices. I want a phone call that says, something came up, I'll be home late. I want to matter enough to warrant 5 seconds of your attention. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the hurt underneath. But clearly, that's too much to ask. She disappeared into her room, not his, hers, the guest suite she hadn't used in weeks, and closed the door with a quiet click that felt louder than any slam. Damien stood in the hallway, still wearing his coat, and felt the weight of what he'd just done. He'd promised her things would change, and at the first test, he'd failed completely. He wanted to go after her. Wanted to explain that the Empire wasn't something he could just ignore, that people's lives depended on his decisions, that one moment of distraction could cost everything. But she already knew all that, and she was asking him to care about her anyway. He went to his room, poured himself a drink he didn't want, and stared at the city lights until dawn. The distance between them grew over the next week, not the angry, volatile kind. That would have been easier to handle. This was cold and polite, Lena treating him like a roommate instead of a husband. She said good morning, asked about his day, made conversation over dinner when they happened to eat together, but the warmth was gone. The easy intimacy they'd built was locked away behind walls he recognized because he'd built them first. Work became his escape. Damien threw himself into operations with an intensity that had Marco pulling him aside. Boss, you need to slow down. I'm fine. You're running on 3 hours of sleep, and I saw you take 6 calls during the Martinelli meeting. Marco crossed his arms. What's going on? Nothing. Is it the wife? Damien's glare could have melted steel. Don't. I'm just saying, you've been different since the wedding, distracted, and now you're back to the way you used to be, but worse. Marco held up his hands. I'm not trying to overstep, but whatever's going on at home, you need to handle it before it becomes a liability. The word liability made something in Damien's chest go cold, because Marco was right. Being distracted in his world got people killed, and if he was this messed up over Lena giving him the cold shoulder, what would happen when things got really bad? That night, he tried talking to her. Found her in the living room with her laptop, working on something that made her frown at the screen. Can we talk? He asked. About what? About us. About how we fix this. She closed the laptop, gave him her full attention. Okay, how do we fix this? I don't know. Tell me what you need. I need you to actually want to be here, Damien, not just physically present while your mind is running through strategy and operations. She tucked her legs under her. I need you to choose me sometimes. Choose us. I am choosing you. I'm here right now. Because I'm upset, not because you want to be. She shook her head. Do you know what I've realized? You're only present when there's a problem to solve. When things are good, when I'm not demanding your attention, you disappear into work. I'm a crisis you manage, not a person you love. That's not true. It's not. Isn't it? When's the last time you came home early just because you wanted to see me? When's the last time you put down your phone during dinner without me asking? When's the last time you chose me over a meeting that could have waited? He couldn't answer, because she was right, and they both knew it. I love you, he said finally. That hasn't changed. I know you do. But love isn't enough if you're not willing to make space for it in your life. She stood, came over to him, touched his face gently. I'm not asking you to give up the Empire. I'm asking you to stop using it as a shield against actually feeling things, against being vulnerable, against me. I don't know how to do that. I know, and I'm trying to be patient while you figure it out. But Damien, I can't keep being the only one fighting for this relationship. Her eyes were sad. At some point, you have to fight for it too. She kissed his forehead, soft and devastating, and left him standing there with the truth of her words settling like stones in his stomach. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Damien had been in Chicago for 3 days, handling a situation with one of their suppliers. It was important. Millions of dollars on the line, plus the stability of their entire distribution network. He told Lena he'd be back Friday. Friday came and went. The situation in Chicago got more complicated, requiring another 2 days. He texted Lena brief updates, promised he'd be home soon. When he finally walked through the door on Sunday night, the penthouse was dark. Too dark. Too quiet. "Lena?" he called out. No answer. He checked the kitchen, the living room, her room. Empty. Her laptop was gone, some of her clothes. The small things she'd scattered around the penthouse that made it feel lived in. Panic hit him like a fist to the chest. He called her phone. It rang once, then went to voicemail. He tried again. Same thing. She was declining his calls. He found the note on the kitchen counter, written in her precise handwriting. "I'm staying at a hotel for a few days. I need space to think. And you need space to decide what you actually want. This isn't an ultimatum. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your empire. I'm asking you to choose yourself, the version of yourself that isn't just a weapon pointed at the world. Call me when you figure out who that is. I love you. That's why I'm leaving." Damien read it 3 times, and each time it felt like taking a bullet. She'd left him. Not permanently, she'd made that clear. But she'd left. And the penthouse suddenly felt exactly like what it had been before her. Cold. Empty. A fortress instead of a home. He called Marco. "I need you to find her." "Boss, I need to know she's safe. Just tell me where she is." Marco was quiet for a moment. "The Meridian on Park. She checked in this afternoon." "Alone?" "Yeah. 2 security guys watching her floor, both ours. She's safe." Damien should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something worse. The realization that even when she left, Lena made sure his people were there to protect her. She wasn't running from him. She was running from what he'd become. He poured a drink, then another. Sat in the dark living room and tried to remember the last time he'd been genuinely happy. Not satisfied with a successful operation or a problem solved, but actually happy. Every memory that came up had Lena in it. Her laugh when he said something unexpectedly funny. Her face in the firelight during the storm. The way she looked at him like he was more than just a collection of violence and strategy. The quiet moments over coffee, over dinner, in bed when the rest of the world disappeared and it was just them. He'd built an empire that controlled half of New York. Had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Had power that made dangerous men nervous. And none of it meant anything without her. The realization didn't come like lightning. It came slow and heavy, settling into his bones like truth usually did. He'd been so afraid of losing control, of being vulnerable, of letting someone matter more than the empire that he'd pushed away, the only person who made him want to be more than what he'd become. Damien looked around the penthouse. The expensive furniture, the art that meant nothing to him, the space that was designed to intimidate instead of comfort. This was what he'd chosen over Lena, this emptiness dressed up as success. He picked up his phone, started to call her, stopped. She'd asked him to figure out who he was beyond the empire. Calling her now, before he had an answer, would just be more of the same. He needed to actually do the work. For the next 3 days, Damien forced himself to slow down, delegated more to Marco and his other lieutenants, came home early, sat with the silence and the discomfort of not having work to hide behind. And in that silence, he finally started to see clearly. The empire had never been about power. It had been about survival, about proving to himself and the world that the scared kid from Hell's Kitchen could be untouchable, about building walls so high that nothing could hurt him again. But walls that kept pain out also kept love out. And he'd built his so well that even when Lena had gotten inside, he'd kept building, kept adding layers, kept protecting himself from the very thing he wanted most. He was exhausted, bone-deep tired of always being on guard, always strategizing, always treating life like a war to be won instead of experienced. And for the first time in his adult life, Damien admitted to himself that he didn't want to do this anymore. Not like this. Not alone. On the 4th day, he called her. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Damien, I figured it out." "Figured what out?" "Who I am without the empire, without the violence and the power plays." He took a breath. I'm someone who's been hiding for so long I forgot what it felt like to actually live. And I don't want to hide anymore. Lena was quiet for a long moment. What does that mean? It means I'm done putting the Empire first, done using work as armor, done pretending I don't need anyone. His voice roughened. It means I need you, Lena. Not as a crisis I manage or a problem I solve, as the person who makes me want to be better than what this world made me. Damien, I'm not asking you to come home yet. You need space, and I respect that. But I want you to know that I'm changing things, really changing them this time. He stared out at the city. I've spent the last few days delegating operations, setting up systems so I'm not the single point of failure. Starting the transition to legitimate business I told you about. It'll take time, but I'm serious about getting out. Why now? Because losing you hurt more than anything I've ever experienced. And I've been shot, stabbed, and beaten half to death more times than I can count. He managed a rough laugh. Turns out emotional pain is worse than physical. Who knew? I knew, she said quietly. I've been hurting too. I know. I'm sorry for all of it, for making you feel like you weren't enough, when the truth is, I wasn't enough for you. Wasn't brave enough to let you all the way in. Are you brave enough now? I don't know, but I'm willing to try. He paused. Lena, I love you, not in spite of what you're asking of me, but because of it. You're the first person who ever demanded I be more than a weapon, and I want to be that person, for you, for us, for myself. She was crying. He could hear it in her breathing. I love you too. So much it scares me. Yeah, me too. I need more time, just a few more days to make sure this is real, that you're not just saying what I want to hear. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. Actually here, not just physically present while my mind is somewhere else. Okay, she sniffled. Damien? Yeah? Thank you for fighting for us. Should have done it sooner. You're doing it now. That's what matters. After they hung up, Damien sat with his phone in his hand and felt something unfamiliar. Not the cold satisfaction of a problem solved or an enemy defeated. Something warmer. Something that felt like the first step on a very long road to being the man Lena deserved. He called Marco, started putting the pieces in motion for real change. Not the vague plan he'd mentioned to Lena during the storm, but concrete steps. Meetings with lawyers about setting up legitimate corporations. Conversations with his most trusted people about gradually phasing out the criminal operations. An exit strategy that would take years but would get him out clean. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Lena came home 5 days later. Damien heard the door open, felt his heart kick up even though he'd been expecting her. She appeared in the living room doorway, overnight bag in hand, and they just looked at each other for a long moment. Hi, she said. Hi yourself. He didn't move, didn't push, just let her come to him at her own pace. She set down the bag, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around him. He held her like she might disappear, burying his face in her hair and breathing her in. I missed you, he said against her neck. I missed you too. She pulled back enough to look at him. Are we okay? I think so. We will be. He touched her face. I meant what I said. I'm changing things. Already started. Tell me. They sat on the couch and he walked her through everything. The lawyers, the transition plan, the timeline for getting out. She listened with her business brain engaged, asking smart questions, pointing out potential problems. This is going to take at least 5 years, she said finally. I know. And you're okay with that? With it being slow? I'm okay with anything that gets us to a life where I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder. Where we can be normal. He took her hand. I'm done living like every day is a war. I want peace with you. Normal is overrated, she said, but she was smiling. But peace sounds good. They fell back into their rhythm, but it was different now. Better. Damien made good on his promise. He came home earlier, delegated more, actually turned off his phone during dinner. He was present in a way he'd never managed before, and while it was uncomfortable at first, he found he liked it. Liked hearing about Lena's day without simultaneously planning operations in his head. Liked cooking with her, terrible as he was at it. Liked the quiet evenings where they just existed together without any agenda. One Saturday morning, 6 weeks after Lena came home, Damien woke up and made a decision. Pack a bag, he told her over coffee. What? Pack a bag. Clothes for a few days? Casual stuff? She looked at him suspiciously. Why? Because I'm taking you somewhere, and I'm not telling you where. So pack and trust me. An hour later, they were in his car with Marco driving, heading out of the city. Lena kept asking questions that Damien refused to answer, looking more delighted than annoyed by the mystery. When they finally pulled up to the small airport outside the city, she turned to him with wide eyes. We're flying somewhere? Private plane. Should get us there in about 5 hours. Damien, where are we going? You'll see. The flight was smooth, Lena alternating between trying to guess their destination and just enjoying the novelty of a private plane. When they landed, the California sun was warm and bright, the Pacific Ocean visible in the distance. We're in California, she said as they climbed into the waiting car. Very observant. Damien, we're going to the coast. I found a place. He took her hand. No operations here. No business. No empire. Just us for a few days. The house was right on the beach, small and private, nothing like the ostentatious penthouse. Wood and glass and the sound of waves. Damien had bought it 2 weeks ago, another step in building a life beyond New York. Lena walked through the rooms, touching everything, looking out at the ocean with something close to wonder. This is beautiful. It's ours, if you want it. She turned to look at him. Really? I'm building an exit, remember? This is part of it. A place where we can come when the city gets too heavy. Eventually, maybe a place we live full time. You'd really leave New York? For you, for us? He pulled her close. Yeah, I would. That night, they walked on the beach, barefoot in the sand with the ocean loud beside them. The salt air was clean and cold, nothing like the city. No sirens, no crowds, no weight of an empire pressing down. Just them and the water and the stars overhead. I was scared when I married you, Lena said, her hand in his. Scared you'd be exactly what everyone said. A monster. A man without a heart. And now? Now I know better. She stopped, turned to face him. You're not a monster, Damien. You're just someone who learned to survive in a world that tried to break you. And you did what you had to do. That doesn't excuse it. No. But it makes you human. She touched his face. And I love the human parts of you, the parts you kept hidden because you thought they made you weak. They do make me weak. They make you capable of love. That's not weakness. That's the bravest thing you could be. He kissed her there on the beach with the waves crashing and the night spreading out around them. Kissed her like she was the only thing tethering him to being something more than the violence he'd become. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lena was smiling. Ask me again, she said. Ask you what? What I want. What I need from you. Damien thought back to that first dinner, felt like it was a lifetime ago. What do you want, Lena? This. You, choosing us. Choosing yourself beyond the empire. She put her hand over his heart. I want you to keep being brave enough to feel things, to let me in, to build a life that's more than just survival. I can do that. He covered her hand with his. I want to do that. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Moretti. Best thing I've ever been stuck with. They spent 3 days in California, and they were the best 3 days of Damien's life. No calls from Marco that couldn't wait. No emergencies that required his immediate attention. Just time with Lena, learning how to be present without the armor of work protecting him. On the last evening, they sat on the deck watching the sunset over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. I've been thinking, Lena said. Dangerous habit. She elbowed him gently. About the transition. About going legitimate. Yeah? I want to help. Really help. Not just offering suggestions from the sidelines. She turned to look at him. I have a degree in economics, remember? I'm good with numbers and strategy. Let me be part of this. Let me help you build something different. Damien had been protecting her from the details, keeping her separate from the operations. But she was right. She was smart, capable, and had insights he needed. Okay, he said. Okay? Yeah, partners. He held out his hand. In everything. She shook it solemnly, then burst out laughing. We're so weird. Probably, but it works for us. Flying back to New York felt different, like they were returning not to a prison, but to the first stage of something new. The city spread out below them as they descended, all concrete and lights and endless noise. Damien looked at it and didn't feel the usual weight, felt instead the possibility of what could come next. True to his word, he let Lena into the business. Not the violent parts, he kept her away from anything that could put her at risk, but the legitimate operations he was building. She was brilliant at it, finding efficiencies and opportunities he would have missed. The transition took time, 5 years, like she'd predicted. 5 years of slowly transforming criminal operations into legal businesses. Real estate, private equity, venture capital. Money laundering became strategic investment. Protection rackets became security firms. Piece by piece, he rebuilt himself into something different. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, threats, moments where Damien had to make calls that reminded him exactly what he was. But through it all, Lena was there. Not judging, not demanding he be perfect, just present. Loving him through the hard parts and celebrating the victories. By the time they celebrated their 6th anniversary, Damien had reduced his criminal operations by 70%. The rest would take another 2 years to phase out completely, but the hardest part was over. They were having dinner at Antonio's, their place, Lena called it, when she reached across the table and took his hand. "I have something to tell you," she said. His heart kicked up. "Good something or bad something?" "Good. At least, I think it's good." She bit her lip, nervous in a way he rarely saw. "I'm pregnant." The world tilted sideways. Damien stared at her, processing the words, and felt something crack open in his chest. "You're pregnant. About 8 weeks." Her eyes searched his face. "Are you okay with this? I know we never really talked about kids, but..." He was around the table and pulling her up into his arms before she could finish. Held her so tight she squeaked in protest, then laughed against his shoulder. "I take it you're happy," she managed. Terrified. But yeah, happy. He pulled back to look at her. "We're having a baby." "We are." She touched his face. "You're going to be a father, Damien." "I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out." She smiled. "Together." Their daughter was born in spring, 7 months later. Damien held her in the hospital, this impossibly small person, and felt every wall he'd ever built completely dissolve. "She's perfect," Lena said from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "She's terrifying," Damien replied. But he couldn't stop looking at her, at the tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, at the face that was somehow both him and Lena. "What should we name her?" Lena asked. They'd gone back and forth for months without deciding, but looking at his daughter, Damien knew. "Elena, after you." That's practically the same name. Elena Sofia, after you and my mother. He'd never known his mother well, but she'd tried to protect him. That counted for something. Elena Sofia Moretti. Lena tested it out. "I love it." Becoming a father changed everything. Damien had thought loving Lena had transformed him, but this was different, deeper, more fundamental. He looked at Elena and saw every choice he'd made, every person he'd hurt, every line he'd crossed. And he looked at her and wanted to be better than all of it. The transition accelerated. Within a year, Damien had exited the last of his criminal operations. It cost him, some alliances broken, some bridges burned, some threats that required careful handling. But he did it. For Elena. For Lena. For the man he wanted to be instead of the one he'd become. By Elena's 2nd birthday, Damien Moretti was, for all practical purposes, a legitimate businessman. He ran a portfolio of companies worth billions, employed thousands of people in legal operations, and had reinvented himself so thoroughly that most people under 30 had no idea what he'd once been. But he knew. Every day he carried the weight of what he'd done, the people he'd hurt, the lives he'd destroyed. That didn't go away just because he'd changed course. "You're brooding again," Lena said one evening. They were in California. They'd started spending more time there, away from New York. Elena was asleep upstairs, and they were on the deck watching the ocean. "Just thinking." "About?" "About whether any of this makes up for what I did. Whether being a better person now erases the person I was." Lena was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't erase it. You can't undo the past. So what's the point? The point is you stopped. You chose differently. You broke a cycle that could have continued for another generation. She took his hand. You're not the same person you were when I married you, Damien, and that matters. Not because it erases anything, but because it means you're capable of change, of growth. I'm still responsible for what I did. Yes, and you'll carry that forever, but you don't have to let it define the rest of your life. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Elena will grow up with a father who chose her over power, who chose love over fear. That's your legacy now, Meadow. Not what you did before, but what you chose to do after. He thought about that. About Elena growing up in a world where her father wasn't a crime boss, but just a father. Imperfect, trying his best, but present and loving and there. I want to do something, he said. Do what? Give back. Somehow. All the money I made from the criminal operations, I want to use it for something good. They talked late into the night, planning. By morning, they had the outline of a foundation. Money for community programs in the neighborhoods Damien's operations had hurt most. Scholarships for kids trying to escape the cycle of poverty and violence. Support for families who'd lost people to the criminal world. It wouldn't fix what he'd done, but it was something. The Moretti Foundation launched 2 years later, funded with $1 billion and Lena running it. She had a talent for it, seeing where the money could do the most good, building programs that actually helped instead of just looking good on paper. Damien stayed in the background, handling the business side while Lena became the public face. It felt right. She'd always been better with people anyway. Elena grew up healthy and happy, surrounded by love and stability. She'd never know the violence that had defined her father's early life, would never have to survive the way he had, and that more than anything felt like redemption. 10 years after their wedding, Damien and Lena stood on the California beach at sunset. Elena was with her grandparents for the week. Lena's mother had eventually come around, started being part of their lives, and it was just the two of them. Do you ever regret it? Damien asked. Marrying me, staying through everything. Never. Lena said it without hesitation. Do you? Never. He pulled her close. You saved me, you know, from becoming someone completely lost to the violence. You saved yourself. I just gave you a reason to try. Same thing. They stood there as the sun sank into the Pacific, painting the world gold and orange and red. Behind them was the life they'd built together. Ahead was whatever came next. Damien had spent years trying to control everything, to protect himself from vulnerability, to be untouchable. And in the end, the thing that had saved him was letting someone touch him, really touch him. See past the armor to the scared kid underneath who'd just been trying to survive. Lena had demanded he be more than what the world made him, and somehow, impossibly, he'd become that person. Not perfect, still carrying the weight of his past, still making mistakes and learning as he went, but present, loving, human. I love you, he said, not for the first time and not for the last. I love you too. Lena turned in his arms, kissed him soft and sweet. Thank you for choosing us, for choosing yourself. Best choice I ever made. They walked back to the house as darkness fell, hand in hand, and Damien felt something he'd never expected to feel. Peace. Not the peace of victory or dominance or control, the peace of being known completely and loved anyway. The peace of building something real instead of just surviving. The peace of being more than the sum of his worst choices. He'd entered the marriage out of duty, expecting nothing and protecting himself from everything. And he'd found instead the thing he'd been missing his whole life. A home, a family, a reason to be better. Love. And in the end, that was worth more than any empire he could have built.